Good afternoon, one and all. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I'm Needu, second year MA student of Department of English, MANUU. I welcome you all to the fifth plenary session of the International Conference on Translating Cultures, exploring the intersections of language and literature. It's my honor and privilege to stand here before you today. Before we delve into the cultivating topics and engaging discussion that lie ahead, it's my pleasure to introduce our esteemed chair, Dr. Taragesh Vibi. His presence and leadership will undoubtedly guide us through this remarkable event, ensuring a seamless and enriching experience for all. Sir, please.
Thank you. Thank you for your introduction. So let me share my PowerPoint first.
Tarakesha VB is a professor at the Department of Translation Studies at English and Foreign Languages University, Hyderabad, India. He has published in the areas of translation studies, colonialism and nationalism, linguistics, nationalism or identity, literary historiography, etc. He is a bilingual writer who has published both in Kannada and English. He has coordinated a translation both in Kannada and English. He has coordinated a translation series called Classical Kannada Text in English. He has handled many research projects in the area of translation studies. He is one of the editorial board of several journals. He has also coordinated a national level project on rethinking the crisis in English studies. He has nearly 24 years of teaching service in translation studies. He has presented paper in more than 150 seminars or conferences, has organized more than 10 seminars, conferences or workshops. He also directed many plays. Now I would like to introduce our esteemed speakers for the plenary session, Dr. Bimla Gautam sir and Dr. John. Dr. John, he's a lecturer in translation at the University of Hong Kong. He has extensive qualification in translation and education, including degrees in translation, a master in teacher education, and various teaching certificates. He is a fellow and chartered linguist of the Chartered Institute of Linguistics. He has been teaching translation since 1997 and has experience in other universities as well. He is also a freelance translator. Dr. John has served as a language consultant and adjudicator, and he is involved in various academic journals and publications. His research interests include translation studies, comparative criticism, linguistics, and translation pedagogy. Now, I humbly request the chair to start the session.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your introduction. Let me share my screen first. Wait a minute. Okay. Okay.
Sir,
do you see my slides? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. So thank you so much for inviting me to this conference. Thank you, Maulana Azad, National Urdu University, and thank you, National Translation Mission for inviting me to this conference. It's my honor to give a talk here. So today my topic is translation as creative rewriting, a study of two English versions of Lu Xun's The True Story of RQ. My name is John. I'm a lecturer in translation at the University of Hong Kong. So this is my educational background and my teaching experience. I'm now teaching at the University of Hong Kong, and before that I worked as a part-time teacher at different universities, including the University of Manchester. So I'm writing a book titled Dialogic Translation Studies, Charles Dickens, David Copperfield in Chinese. I think it can be published next year. So this is the outline of my presentation. So I'll begin with the concept of translation as rewriting. Then I'll introduce of the source text author Lu Xun and his work RQ Zheng Zhuan, and 2 translations by Yang Xiangyi and Gladys Yang. The first one, The True Story of RQ, and the second one by William Lyle, RQ, The Real Story. And I'll give you 2 examples for analysis. And finally, the conclusion. So to begin with, I think many translation scholars are familiar with these 2 big names, Andre Lefebvre and Susan Bassnett. They made a substantial contribution to the to the cultural turn in translation theories. They propose translation as rewriting or translation as reflection. So the argument is that translation is a kind of historical transformation, which is conditioned by many factors in the target culture, like the dominant ideology, the poetics, which means the literary convention, the patronage, which includes, for example, the publisher or government's influence. And these factors in the socio-cultural factors work as constraints under which the translator is working. And these constraints will affect will shape the final product of the translation. So translation is essentially more or less different from the source text. So this is the basic idea of translation as rewriting. So it's against the traditional view that a translation should always be faithful to the source text. And whenever that you can't find equivalence from the translation, you should criticize the translation for doing a bad job. But in fact, they told us that translation is historically transformed. I think it echoes with Lu Xun's words. Lu Xun actually describes his own work, The True Story of RQ, and he said, "I thought once I had exaggerated, but I do not think so now. If I were to describe events in China today exactly as they happen, they will appear grotesque to people of other countries or those of a future better China." In other words, as a Chinese reader, as today's Chinese reader, my response to the true story of RQ is essentially different from the responses of Lu Xun's time, and let alone the reader in other countries. So writing and reading, they both are conditioned by history. So the same message will be changed in different historical environments. So this is the concept of translation as rewriting. So this is Lu Xun. So if you're interested in modern Chinese literature, you most probably have heard about his name. He's generally regarded as the father of modern Chinese literature. And he's also called the representative of the nation's conscience. And Lu Xun is actually his pen name. He has got many pen names, and Lu Xun was the most frequently used one. And his original name is Zhao Zhuoren. And he's an eminent essayist, novelist, and translator in China. His work is famous for the biting satire and subtle humor. And he's also a supporter of literal and hard translation. Actually, before he became a professional translator, he's already read about 100 foreign literature in translation. So he's a professional reader. You can say that he's a professional reader of translated literature, and he learned new techniques and skills from the translations. And at the time, classical Chinese was the main literary language, and he engaged. He participated in the new cultural movement and promote vernacular Chinese as the main literary language. So most of his work was written in vernacular Chinese, but also mixed with classical Chinese, because he has used classical Chinese since his childhood. And also mixed with his foreignized Chinese. So the style is a hybrid Chinese. So it's also a period style. And in his preface to the series Call to Arms, which includes the present work, the true story of RQ, Lu Xun records how he was shot by the lantern slide that showed the Chinese people were close and numb. They were very, very apathetic when they saw that a countryman bound in the middle of the picture was going to be decapitated because he was accused of being a spy. According to the caption, these people, the Chinese countrymen, had come to enjoy the spectacle. The scene led Lu Xun to give up studying medicine in Japan and return to China to provoke change in the people through art and literature. So you may wonder whether he's also an artist. Well, actually, he's basically a writer, but he also promoted painting and novel illustrations for the people, for the illiterate people who can't read. So the true story of RQ and the term RQism is very popular in China. Today we still talk about RQism, and it's because of this story. So the content is about the life of a young laborer, RQ, who's a nameless person, so people call him RQ, who keeps bullying the weak and being bullied by people stronger than himself. He's not educated, so he basically led a meaningless life. But whenever he's defeated, he will console himself by imagining the opponent to be his son, and he himself to be the father, so that he could accuse the son of beating his father. So this is his spiritual victory scheme. He invented this scheme, and people call it RQism. And actually, it's a symbol of the weaknesses and vices of the whole nation at the time. Finally, RQ is mistaken for a revolutionary, and when he is decapitated, his countrymen has come to enjoy the spectacle. So the story mirror what he saw in the lantern slide in Japan. So the theme is to explore and expose the Chinese national character in the 1920s and to provoke change in the people through literature. And it's also to criticize the traditional ideology Confucianism for creating a hierarchy which has led to many social problems. So Lu Xun was generally regarded as a cultural fighter against Confucianism. And his style is very, he likes biting satire and subtle humor. And the Chinese he used, as I said, is hybrid to mix vernacular Chinese with classical Chinese and foreignized Chinese. So it poses significant challenge to the translators. So here's a reputable translation couple, Mr. Yang Xiangyi and his wife, Miss Gladys Yang. And they met each other at Oxford when they studied there. Mr. Yang studied Latin, Greek, and English literature at Oxford University. And at that time, Gladys Taylor was studying Chinese language and literature. Then they married and become a translation couple. And in 1940, they returned to China to start their translation career. So Mr. Yang was a very patriotic man. And in an interview, Mr. Yang said that he translated actually so many works about almost all the Chinese work from literature to history, from ancient times to contemporary contemporary China. So he believes that translation should be faithful to the source text, so the translator should not overemphasize creativity. So you can see that he prefers literal translation to free translation. He thinks that the original text is like a work of art. The translator's task is to imitate it, but it can never be as good as the source text. So here, this is the traditional view of translation. A translation is always subordinate to the source text, and it can never be as good as the source text. On the whole, he prefers literalism. And the American scholar, Joe Kowalitz, appreciate the Young's translation. And the translation was first published in 1953, and then it was revised for several times. And the 1978 version is the latest. So after about 40 years, right, there's a new translation produced by an American professor William Lyle, who was an associate professor of Chinese language and literature at Stanford University for more than 30 years. And he's an expert of Lu Xun, and he obtained his PhD from Chicago University, and his thesis was about Lu Xun. Then he published a book, Lu Xun's Vision of Reality. So he's an expert about Lu Xun, and is a scholar. So this translation is more scholarly than the Young's. So this translation was published in 1990, and Lyle aims at, in his preface, he says that he aims at reproducing in his translation the mixed register of the source text, which is the vernacular and classical Chinese. So the vernacular is the main literary language, and with a little bit classical Chinese. And Lyle points out that whenever Lu Xun used classical Chinese, is to criticize the classical civilization. So he quotes, unlike students today when students use classical Chinese, is to add some flavor to one's writing, right? To show one's learning, right, to the readers. But in Lu Xun's work, to quote classical Chinese was to criticize the classical civilization. And his translation captures the satirical and humorous tone of the original. So for me, his greatest contribution seems to be to capture the humor of the source text. His work is on the whole more humorous than the Young's, and probably because he prefers a creative approach. While the Young's translation is for a British readership, Lyle is for an American audience. Scholars like Hilary Chung, Quirk Denton, and Michael Duke highly praise his translation. So because of the limited time, I just show you two examples because they are rather complicated. And the first one is from chapter 1. And here, the writer starts by, the author starts by telling the reader how difficult it is to choose a suitable genre for RQ, because in the traditional Chinese history, there's RQ would have no place in history because he's nobody. He's an insignificant man. And here, there are two versions. I don't. Because of time limitation, we can just focus on the English translation. And here he mentioned lap yin is a classical Chinese word. So with the quotation marks. So it's a classical Chinese word in the vernacular. And here the Youngs try to create some humorous effect. I'm not one of those who achieve glory by writing. So this is the meaning of lap yin, right? Achieve glory by writing. But this is not very archaic. And the next sentence, for an immortal pen has always been required to record the deeds of an immortal man. So here you can see that this sentence is a bit funny, right? A bit satirical. And pen, although pen and man do not rhyme with each other because they are not exactly the same, but the sounds are quite similar, right? Immortal pen and immortal man. So the effect is amusing. So here you can see that they exercise creativity in their translation. And for Lyle, he aims at something a little different. So to achieve glory by writing becomes I'm not the kind of writer who forge words of immortality for generations yet to be. So this style is a bit like Bible, the older versions of Bible. And with the slash, you can see that he's trying to be poetic here, right? Poetic. Besides, if you're going to get your words to last all that long, they've got to be about someone worth remembering all that long in the first place. So the second sentence is not as amusing as the Young's version, but the first sentence imitate the classical style of lap yin in Chinese. So the style is a bit archaic, and to create the difference in register between the two sentences. So I think here he has done a very good job, and his translation is very innovative. And the American reader can see that there are two registers in the writing, and this is what he talks about in his preface, translation preface. So he has achieved his goal. But you can see that the Young's version is also creative. Okay, one more example. This is from chapter 3, where Akil bullied a little nun. Actually, Akil, on the same day, he tried to bully two different people. And for the first one, he was defeated and he was beaten. And he regarded that as the first humiliation in his life. Then he came across another person. Then he tried to insult him. Then he was hit by that person, and then Akil regarded it as the second humiliation in his life. Then he was very unhappy because he was beaten twice on the same day and experienced two humiliations. And then he came across a third person, the little nun, who is very weak and easy to bully. So he took out his humiliation on the nun, and then touch his head, touch her head, touch her face. And actually, from today's perspective, it's actually sexual harassment. Right? He did that to a little nun, and he did that outside a wine shop, and some customers were drinking wine in the wine shop, but no one stopped Akil from doing that. Instead, they just, you may say, enjoy the show. They laugh at that. They enjoy the performance, and Akil was satisfied by their praise, and then he bullied her more. So finally, the little nun can do nothing but just say some swear word. Akil, may you die sonless, or may you never have a son. So here you can see two different versions, and Lyle's version is more accurate. May you never have a son. So for the traditional Chinese people, it's important to have a son rather than a daughter. So this is a faithful translation of the source text. But the Young's version is closer to the subtext of the source text. May you die sonless. So traditionally, if people do not have a son when they die, they do not have a son at their bed. So Chinese people expect their son or sons to be with them when they die. So die sonless is is the Chinese tradition, but not actually in the source text, right? You can say that it's the implication of the source text, but it's more than the source text. So it's the explicit meaning. So another point to note is that the Akil laughed heartily. He said, "Ha ha ha." So the same as English, right? Ha ha ha. And the wine shop patrons also said, "Ha ha ha." And they both were satisfied, and Akil roared with delighted laughter. The man in the wine shop roared too, with only slightly less satisfaction. Slightly less satisfaction. So let's take a look at the Lyle translation. Ha ha ha. 100% elated. Akil laughed. Ha ha. 90% elated. The patrons of the wine shop laughed too. So you can see the difference. So you may wonder why there's such difference in between the two translations. Because Lyle's translation is more literal. Actually, he's translating the literal meaning of 十分 and 9分. In Chinese, 十分 is a frequently used term meaning very or something like very happy. You can say 十分快樂, very. But the meaning of 10 is not noticeable when people say that it's a metaphorical meaning, the literal meaning. But here, Lu Xun invented 9分. So the 9. So it makes 10 very obvious. So the 90 makes the 100 becomes obvious. So he kept the nuances of the source text, the subtlety of the source text, to show the reader the inventive language of Lu Xun. So he prefers here Lyle uses a literal translation, 100% and 90%, to show how apathetic the onlookers are. Right? So this is the theme of the story, right? There are many apathetic outsiders, many apathetic onlookers, right? Who lack compassion for other people. And actually, Lu Xun was angry with that. He was very disappointed. So he write this story to tell the reader what's happening. Okay, and he also keeps the ha 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 in the translation, and then he edited here the 3 ha ha into 2. Right? So in the source text, ha 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 is repeated. So they both say that, but in the translation, because it's 90% elated, so there's only 2 ha ha. Okay, so here you can see how creative Lyle is in recreating Lu Xun's style to the American reader. And although the youngs prefer a literal approach, they do not keep ha ha in the source text, in the target text, and the effect is not as striking as the source text. So here, personally, I think Lyle has done a better job than the youngs in terms of recreating the subtleties of the language of the source text. So from these 2 examples, you can see the typical distinctive features of the 2 translations, and they are quite different from each other. So my conclusion. So translation is a creative rewriting activity, as shown by the 2 examples above. No matter how faithful you would like to be to the source text, you always have to exercise your imagination and creativity to rewrite the source text in the target language. And in this sense, fidelity is not the ultimate standard to assess a translation. So unlike the traditional point of view that a translation should always be faithful, and any mistranslation or any deviation from the source text should be criticized. But this is not the approach of creative rewriting. So if we understand translation as creative rewriting, we will be in a better position to appreciate fully the effort of the translators and to see more the gains the gains of the translation rather than the losses. So I think this is the ultimate goal of translation criticism. And this is the reference list of this presentation. Thank you for listening. Thank you.
We will take up the discussion after the second presentation. I hope it is okay with you. Now I request Bhimlal Gautam from Tribhuvan University, Nepal, to make a presentation. Bhimlal Gautam. Please unmute yourself. Bhimlal Gautam.
Yes, I'm.
Yeah, I hear you. Go ahead.
Is it? Am I audible now?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. I'm sorry for because my laptop didn't work at the time, so I just transfer it to the computer of my office here. So, okay, fine. It's moving. Okay, fine. So, namaste, I'm Bhim Gautam from Tribhuvan University, Nepal. And I work especially in social linguistic issues and talking about the translating culture, language through literature. It's also the part of linguist and especially in the social linguistic issues. And today I'm talking about these things. The outline of my presentation is I will be talking about a short introduction about translation. Even all of us know about what translation is. Then after, I'll be talking about translation yesterday, today and tomorrow. What will be the future of translation? Then after, I'll be talking something else about translating culture through language, bringing some context of Nepal. And then I will be talking about translating culture through literature. And I will be ending with some translation practice in Nepal. Some example with that one. So we know that translation is a process of communication across languages and cultures that constitutes a double helix of reading and writing. So from source text to the target text. So there is a kind of communication gap. There is a kind of communicator whom we call the translator from the source text to the targeted reader. And a kind of creativity, is the previous presenter pointed out that a kind of creativity is working in translation process. So translation dwells on two different linguistic and cultural systems. Because we know that linguistics, whenever we talk about the linguistics, automatically that language and literature comes within linguistics part, and it brings the cultural aspect of the translated text. So it dwells, it lives in between source to the target and hangs sometimes in between the two. So it is a kind of mechanical reproduction of a text in another language that involves the translator conscious and creative manipulation of linguistic resources in the production of the target text. So we have already seen that the Lucian's texts were translated from, especially they were translated from Chinese text to English, from the Chinese translator and from American translator, the professor from the Stanford University or something like that. So we could see the gap in between the two, and we could find out the authenticity of the text, talking about the transforming the culture through the language too. So talking about the history of translation, we all know about that. The translation started many, many years ago, probably 2nd century BC, the Rosetta Stone. We know about the Odyssey, that from Greek to Latin has been translated into the Odisha, or if we go back to the linguistics history, we could see that the dinosaur tracks, Techne Grammaticae, has been translated into the techniques. So tracks, text, grammar has been translated into the lingua latina or something like that. Then after we could see that the textual translation has been slowly converting into the religious translation, like that the Bible translation, the Old Testament into Old English during the 11th century AD. Then after we could see some Sanskrit texts which are translated into many South Asian languages, which we recite these days all the time. Those classical texts, Sanskrit texts, even the Qurans and other religious texts that we could see, which were translated into many vernacular languages of South Asia and many parts of the world too. So translation of the literary text into many vernacular languages, that started especially in the 15th century onwards in a very, very systematic way. So in the beginning, in the classical time, the translation was a kind of hobby for the people, hobby for some elites group. But after 15th century, translation has become one systematic study of transforming the source text into the target text. In the context of Nepal, that we could see the Valmiki Ramayana has been translated into the Bhanubhakta Ramayana around 17th century after the unification movement in the history of Nepal. So Bhanubhakta Ramayana, when Nepal was unified by Prithviraj Shah, then after Nepali became the language for power and administration, and Bhanubhakta Ramayana was translated from Sanskrit to the Nepali, the vernacular Nepali, and every Nepali people at their home recited Ramayana as a part of their original text, and slowly and slowly it has strengthened the Nepali language as a common lingua franca throughout the country after the unification movement of Nepal. And today the translation is not only limited to religious texts, it is not only limited to certain ancient texts, but these days translation is the part of the political arena that believes translation is a political mission. Highly political content is translated from Chinese, Russian and other Asian and European languages to English, as well as from Canadian French into English and vice versa. So many texts, not only the textbook, but many contents like the advertisements, many contents like the movies and stories have been translated from many languages, many local languages, from major languages like the Russian, Chinese and others like Lusun. Lusun's many texts have been translated into Nepali. So many Indian writers' texts have been translated into Nepali. So it's the case for other languages too. So translation studies itself became an important area of language teaching and learning at schools and university level. So we know about the GT method, grammar translation method. So probably grammar translation method is the outcome of translation study. So especially in the South Asian context, many languages, almost all the language teaching activities are still more dominantly used in the GT methods, where we use the translation, full translation almost all the time. And slowly the machine translation is being used in many social network and sites too. Then could you please move the slide? Yes. And translation tomorrow, we could, if this is the process, what we could imagine about the future of translation. We are in the era of AI, artificial intelligence. Even we are being victimized, whether it is positive or negative, about ChatGPT. So computer-assisted translation. ICT allows translator free access to multilingual resources and tools like terminologies, database, translation memories, electronic dictionaries, glossaries, encyclopedia, and so on. Interdisciplinary studies from the humanities to social science and technology. So science and technologies was once upon a time was very difficult to understand, to study. But these days, because of the translation, because of that computer-assisted translation techniques, it has become a part of interdisciplinary studies too. So translation is not used only in the education, class teaching, classroom teaching, humanities and social sciences, but in technology and other fields too. So Google, Facebook, and many other social sites with translated text, we could see that our text, the Roman texts, have been translated automatically into English text, Romanized text, or Devanagari text, or the Urdu text, or something like that. So critically in literary and cultural translation, even there are so many problems and issues of translation tomorrow. What will be the future of translation tomorrow, like that? So translating culture. Translation is also a cultural entity too, we should not forget. See about the context. In the context of Nepal, that white race, this indicates the death. But in the West, in the western part, the same white race indicates the virginity, the purity. So the cultural entities always remains there, which that the future of translation, that without human being, without human cognition, without human creativity, the translation could not be possible in the future. So intercultural competence and awareness is necessary, because translation is less a linguistic and more a cultural procedure. So it is not only the translating of lexicon to lexicon, but sometimes the translator should understand the cultural sensitivity while translating this text. We have already known about some well-known literary figures whose texts are translated into many languages, and they have created lots of chaos. They have created lots of misunderstanding among the religious and cultural groups too. So awareness of cultural terms and jargons like the ecology, material culture, social culture, organizations, customs, gestures, and habits. These things should be understood, should be clearly understood about while translating the text. So translating language and literature. So translation is more cultural, less linguistic activity, as we have already talked. For example, in Nepali text, in the source text, Ramesh Ghara Pugna Batoma Ukalo Chadi Rakheko Thiyo. This is the Nepali text. While translating it into the English, it is alone Ramesh was struggling to reach home. Here see the number of lexicon used in Nepali text and the number of lexicon used in English text. So Nepali is the source text and the target text. So here we could see that struggling indicate that Bato ma ukalo chadi rakheko thiyo. This whole text, this long phrase in Nepali provides the real single meaning of the struggling into English. Because we know that South Asia is very rich in religious and cultural norms and the values. For example, we do have so many kinship terminologies. While translating almost all these kinship terminologies into the English, we cannot exactly translate almost all the kinship terminologies into English, because English has only uncle. But in Nepali, we have Kaka, Bodo Bau, Bhatija, Mama, Sano Mama, Tulo Mama, so many terminologies are there. That's why we need to know about this cultural uniqueness of source language in order to transform them into the target language. That's why cultural tone is one of the core ideologies in translation, where translator can do justice to transfer the source text to the target reader. Otherwise, there will be misinterpretation. If translator cannot do the real justice to the original text, to the source text, transforming into the target text, at that time, translator creativity, translator justice is necessary. So, talking about the translation practice in Nepal, we have been practicing here in the context of Nepal that literary translation. So, literary texts have been translated. Many English texts have been translated into Nepali languages. Many Nepali texts have been translated into many other local languages too. So, especially the literary translation, we have story translated, novel translated, and short story translated, even the translation of the poems too, that has been, that is in practice. And we have also the translation of the religious text. So many religious Hindu texts, the Muslim text, and especially the Bible translation, due to the increasing Christianity throughout the world, it has become a part of translation these days in the context of Nepal. So many religious texts, the Gitas, the Mahabharata, the Ramayana, the Qurans, the Bible, Old and the New Testaments, and biblical texts have been translated into Nepal, not only Nepali, but many languages of Nepal too. And translation of the legal and administrative document, especially the Nepalese constitutions, Nepalese law and orders, and so many other documentations have been translated from English to Nepali, Nepali to other local languages too. And translation of historical and cultural texts. So many treaties, like the Sugali treaties between British India and Nepal, many other treaties have been translated into English to Nepali, Nepali to English, and many others. And translation of educational materials, especially teaching learning materials, which are used in schools and higher education, in university education, they have also been translated into Nepali, translated into many other local languages like Magar, Gurung, Sherpa, and they have also been translated equally into English as well. And we have dictionary and grammar translation. It means the dictionary, we have multilingual dictionaries. Sanskrit, English, Nepali dictionaries, Hindi, English, Nepali dictionaries, like that. So, after 2015, the latest constitution of Nepal, the Language Commission has been established according to the Article 287, and the role of Language Commission is very important in order to maintain the policy and translation. But still, there is not exact policy and translation. But Nepal is a multilingual country where we have 131 plus languages spoken, according to the latest census report, having 5 language families and 4 sign languages too. So we need to have a kind of multilingual language policy where we can insert translation as a part of this language policy too. And recently the government of Nepal is planning to maintain 3 language policy. Before last year, Language Commission Nepal has recommended 11 local languages as the provincial languages. So in province Kosi, the Limbu and Maithili. In Madhya province, the Awadhi, Bhojpuri, Maithili and Bajika. In Bagmati province, that is Tamang and Newar in Gandaki province, Magar, Gurung and Bhojpuri in Lumini province, Tharu, Awadhi and Magar. And in Karnali province, even Magar and Khas Nepali and Far Western province, Tharu and Rotali language have been recommended by the Language Commission. So we have one national language, that is Nepali, and automatically the role of English is increasing day by day in the context of Nepal. Even English is taught as a foreign language in Nepal, but attraction of English is everywhere else. That's why Language Commission should manage the special policy and translation, and if it is managed well, if it is managed properly, probably we can provide the real justice for translating culture and language and its intersection paths. So coming to the conclusion, that cultural awareness, sensitivity of the source text, positive attitudes, linguistic variation between different languages, and so on are main points to be considered in translation work. So cultural awareness, we need to be very much aware about the cultural things while translating. From Hindi to Urdu, we can see the cultural activities between Hindu to Muslim. These cultural phenomena are very serious, very sensitive things. One should understand the value of these cultural sensitivity while translating the text. And always we need to have the positive attitudes. If people have less positive attitudes, then translation may ruin the originality of the text. That's why to maintain the originality of the text, always the translator should have the positive attitudes as well as the creativity to give the real justice in their target translations. And these are certain important points. So translation is the transformation and preservation of culture as well. It is not only the transformation, but it is also the preservation of the culture. If we can't translate almost all the Nepali texts into English, why not to clarify those texts by using the italics and giving their meanings and the justification while translating to the English text? So it's the case of the Urdu text as well. You are having the Urdu conference, and in that conference too, so many Urdu lexicons which are culturally sensitive, they can be preserved and they can be transformed. Transformation means globalization. Preservation means localization. That's why you can maintain the cultural balance in between the ST to the TT. It means targeted text. So translation technology cannot create the high quality of translation. It's natural, it's human translation. So thinking about the future of translation, what we call the machine translation these days, think carefully that these machine translation, is it justifiable to transform and preserve the culture? No, it's not possible, because machine can translate only certain things which is programmed somewhere else in the computer software. That's why human translation is always natural translation. Human translation is always justifiable, but only there should be the positive attitudes, cultural sensitivity, and the linguistic variation between different languages. So translating from SVO languages to SOV languages. So the knowledge about the phonetics, phonology, morphology, syntax, and even the semantics and pragmatics is important part of the translation. That's why diversity of language and cultures with the accessibility of communication across them render translation as an essential tool. That's why it is the beauty for the translator to know, to understand the diversity of language and cultures with the accessibility of communication across them to render translation as an essential tool. So I think this is This is my presentation, but I'm ready to answer any questions because my presentation is not based upon any translated text, but I have just summarized the context of Nepal, how translation is going on. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Bhimlal Gautam, for your presentation and also keeping to the time. Okay. The organizers tell me that in plenaries, for plenary speakers, there are no questions. So there will not be any question and answer session. Now we had two contrasting papers presented in this session. John made a very focused presentation, while Bhimlal made a very historical general presentation. John, it was a very good exercise in comparing the two versions in translation of the same text. Some of the issues that you raised are important, but somehow I thought the conclusion was slightly disappointing to me. In the beginning, you raised the issue of ideology, poetics, and patronage, the three factors affecting the translation. You could have applied that to the case study that you had taken up. So finally, the conclusion ended up with questioning the concept of fidelity and arguing for recreativity. Though it was in tune with your title of your presentation, I would have loved if these three factors, how it affected the translation, if it has been highlighted. Because it is also a kind of, this retranslation is a big issue in translation studies today. The art of research is going on. There's a linearity in these two translations. They're not simultaneous retranslations. One translation comes in 1950s and it gets continuously reprinted until 1970s, 80s almost. And in 1990s, you get the second translation. So that linearity could have been proved, number one. Why it did not get reprinted after 1978 is an interesting issue to look at. Because there is a gap between 1978 and the second translation that came out in 1990. So this gap could also be interesting to probe. And the second point that you raised in your presentation is about the first translator is from the source culture, though it's a couple translation, she is from the target culture. So this is also not only a retranslation, but it's also a collaborative translation, I don't know, in that sense. So looking at the collaboration, and then looking at targeting the British audience, and the second translation targeting the American audience. So what does it say? Can we generalize that the post-colonial countries, now we have really become post-colonial in the sense that we have tried to escape from the dominance of British English, but in the post-colonial context, we have fallen into the dominance of American English. Does that indicate it? That is one of the issues that can be probed further too. So in that sense, your paper raised a lot of issues, and Bhim Gautam's paper, very general, highly historical, trying to give a typology, trying to look at the history of translation policy in Nepal, and also trying to take on the issue of language and culture. But I thought the simple distinction between language and culture in the statement like translation is more cultural, less linguistic is highly problematic today. This division between linguistic problems of translation, cultural problems of translation came out in 1960s. Naida and Catford and then Peter Newmark, they continued that tradition. But as you said, during the cultural turn, this distinction between language and culture were not completely different. We thought from 19th onwards, there is a linguistic angle to cultural issues. And all linguistic problems are also cultural. So you try to give several examples. If you take why we are using more words in English than in Nepali language. Nepali language has certain words which are tied up with our family relationship between individuals. The English may not have so many words. So it's not only a linguistic problem, it is a cultural problem. So there is a link between the linguistic issues and the cultural issues. You can't divorce them completely and talk that it is more cultural, less linguistics. If it is more cultural, it is more linguistic. If it is more linguistic, it is more cultural. That's the process, attitude or framework that we need to adapt in the present context. But anyhow, it was a spirited presentation from you and focus presentation from John. I congratulate and thank both of you, and I also thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity to interact with you and listen to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Takeshwar, and the participants for finishing on time. It was an enjoyable session, though it was after lunch. It was difficult for us to stay awake, but thank you. Your discussion kept us awake. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Bimlal Gaudam sir and Dr. John, for contributing this conference. Your contributions have undoubtedly made this plenary session a resounding success, leaving a lasting impact on all those who are present here. Thank you, Dr. Tarekeshwar sir, for chairing the session. We are truly grateful for the dedication, time, and effort that you have invested in ensuring the success of this plenary session. Once again, thank you all. Now we have a 15 minutes tea break, so all of you can move out and have your tea. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.